All right. So it is with a distinct pleasure that I get to introduce our third keynote speaker, Dr. Giuseppe Balirano, who is a professor of English linguistics and translation at the University of Naples L'Orientale, which is, for those of you who are not practicant of Italian universities, one of the best universities in Italy. And he's also the director of the University Language Center and the Rector's Delegate for Lifelong Learning, E-Learning, and Multimedia Enhancement. He is also the president of the Italian Association for the Study of English and the director of the monitoring group on hate speech online at the University of Naples L'Orientale, and the director of a grant, national grant, titled Echoes English Studies to Contrast Hate Online and Enhance Solidarity. He is also the director of the series Betwixt, which publishes original monographs in the field of linguistics and communication studies. His research interests and publications lie in the fields of multimodal critical discourse studies, humor, masculinity, and queer studies, and the discursive representation of organized crime and audiovisual translation. I am not going to read the list of all the books that he has published because it would take essentially the entire time of the keynote, and that would be counterproductive. Let me just add that Dr. Balirano is also a very good friend of mine. We've known each other for a very long time. We will never reveal exactly how long. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. It was just such a long and generous presentation. Let me just tell you that L'Orientale used to be a very good university before I got there, though. When I was a student, then things changed. Right. If I can, I would like to share my PowerPoint so that everybody can actually easier. Let me know whether you can see it or not.
Yes.
Okay. Right, so as I was saying, it's an absolute pleasure to be here today speaking about my research in front of such a competent, and I've seen some faces, so may I add, refreshingly youthful, so we won't say anything about, we won't tell them about our age, but of course I can see a very youthful audience. And I must start by thanking Professor Ottardo for this fantastic opportunity. I can only hope my talk does justice to the subject you've been dealing with over the last 2 weeks. Given the company, I also suspected any unintentional humorous misstep that, of course, I'm going to fall into will be thoroughly analyzed, and it's going to be part of a corpus that you're going to be analyzed later on. Now, I began my research on what I call diasporic humor in 2004, so a lot of years ago, during my PhD in English, Linguistics and Media at the University of Naples Federico II, here in Italy. Under the initial guidance of Professor Dilia Chiaro, well, her influence on my career has been undeniable, and I have to say now more than ever, since she's officially reached legendary status of Professor Emerita at the University of Bologna. Now, the research involved was and is, of course, a semiotically expressed analysis of televised humor in culturally hybrid context, specifically the Anglo-Indian, or if you prefer, the Indo-Saxon sphere in the UK. The series I subjected to scrutiny, or more accurately, found myself repeatedly laughing at, in the name of research, of course, that's what we do, was Goodness Gracious Me. Now, as you may know, Goodness Gracious Me was a groundbreaking British sketch show that first aired on BBC Radio 4 from 1996 to 1998, before transitioning to television on BBC 2 until 2001. The show offered a sharp and satirical exploration of British Asian culture, cleverly subverting stereotypes and employing role reversals to present an Indian perspective on current British society. Praised for its wit and cultural insight, the series became a critical but also a very strong commercial success, drawing an audience of almost 3.85 million viewers in the UK. And it was recognized for its excellence with several awards, including a gold at the Sony Radio Academy Awards and television accolades such as Best Entertainment from Broadcasting Press Guild and the Team Award from the Royal Television Society. Now, though the series ended, unfortunately, in 2001, goodness gracious me, remained influential, returning for a special episode in 2014, possibly the most famous one, to celebrate BBC Two's 50th anniversary, and again in 2015 with an India-themed special series. Now, goodness gracious me paved the way for a series of similar shows that use humor to explore ethnic and cultural tensions, blending traditional cultural elements with mainstream Western life in satirical and engaging, also interesting way, I would say. This legacy is also evident in programs such as The Kumar at number 42, which adopted a mock talk show format to reflect on intergenerational British Asian family dynamics. Citizen Khan till 2016, which focused on the comic struggles of a self-appointed community leader in Birmingham, chewing gum, possibly the most famous one, a bold and irreverent take on contemporary Black British identity, and Fried, which offered a comedic perspective of multicultural and multimodal, if you like, workplace interactions. Each of these programs, in different ways, continued the tradition of using humor as a means of addressing cultural identity and social integration. Now, in the US, this comedic exploration of ethnic and cultural identity found resonance in shows such as Master of None, which offered a thoughtful and often introspective take on the experiences of first-generation immigrants, addressing issues of race, relationships, and career aspiration. Similarly, the Mind Project from 2012 to 2017 blended romantic comedy with cultural commentary, centering on a South Asian American protagonist who both embraced and challenged mainstream Western expectation. Now, like goodness gracious me, this series used humor to engage with themes of identity assimilation and complexities of multicultural life. The success of Goodness Gracious Me and its successors not only paved the way for more representations of British Asians' identity, but also contributed to a broader shift in television comedy, encouraging, if you like, the introduction of other ethnic perspectives. Shows like One Day at a Time, which was actually aired till 2020, expanded this tradition by focusing on a Cuban-American experience, when the Bernie Mac show offered a sharp yet, I would say, heartfelt portrait of African-American family life. Similarly, the previously mentioned Master of None and the Mindy project, or the Mindy project actually, highlighted the experiences of South Asian Americans, demonstrating how comedy, and I would say humor, could be a powerful vehicle for exploring cultural identity, assimilation, and social tensions. While distinct in tone and setting, all these series shared a commitment to blending humor with social commentary, reinforcing the growing presence of diverse voices in mainstream television. Now, to understand how humor mechanisms shared between different cultures may travel in diaspora, it's crucial to recall Ian Chambers' definition of Britishness. This definition, which identified two perspectives and two versions of Britishness. One is Anglo-centric, frequently conservative, backward-looking, and increasingly located in a frozen and largely stereotyped idea of the national, that is English, culture. The other is eccentric, open-ended, and multi-ethnic. Now, this is particularly relevant when examining how diasporic humor operates across cultural boundaries. The interplay between these two perspectives, one rooted in a rigid national identity and the other embracing fluid, multicultural influences, shapes how humorous narratives somehow unfold. The answer to this research question, which is the one that you're going to see here, which were actually used in order to understand how humor mechanisms share different culture and the way they might somehow travel abroad, were somehow quite interesting for us in order to understand how British humor, especially in a diasporic context, would travel. And so this reasoning led towards the formulation of these questions, which were then part of this book. It's a compelling read, if you like, guaranteed to keep you laughing and pondering existential questions at the same time. But I'm not selling the book because it's so old, it's even difficult now to find it. If you want, I can actually email to you. Diasporic humor, as discussed in the publication, operates through the subversion of national formula, creating a liberating hybrid discourse that transcends individual or idiosyncratic expression. This hybrid form, rooted in shared cultural vocabularies, establishes a post-national humorous framework where mainstream and marginal elements seem to coexist. Through the use of hybrid script, diasporic humor addresses power differentials, reverses self-other binaries, and destabilizes fixed identities. Its effectiveness across diverse ethnic groups suggests that hybrid scripts enable cross-cultural resonance, demonstrating how diasporic humor negotiates global global belonging somehow is also introduced while resisting monolithic cultural paradigms through subverted comedic narratives. Now, someone may argue that certain topics have already been widely discussed by Christy Davis, but my hypothesis of diasporic humor, although it builds on Davis' theorization of ethnic humor, takes a different or a totally different direction. As Davis, back in 1982, observes in his seminal work, Ethnic Humor Around the World, ethnic jokes delineate the social, and I'm actually quoting, geographic and moral boundaries of a nation or ethnic group, serving, end quote, serving as a mechanism for reinforcing existing divisions by reducing ambiguities and clarifying cultural borders. Now, these jokes function as tools of categorization, delineating who belongs to a particular cultural national community or group and who remains an outsider. By drawing upon shared stereotypes, they construct and reaffirm collective identities, reinforcing social hierarchies and demarcating the limits of cultural acceptability. Ethnic humor, in the words of Christy Davis, often operates through exaggeration and simplification, shaping how groups perceive themselves and others, either fostering cohesion within the in-group or reinforcing exclusionary attitudes towards the out-group. Now, this process of boundary setting extends beyond mere entertainment. It reflects and perpetuates broader ideological structures that underpin national identity, reinforcing the distinction between us and them, for instance. So there's a huge difference between the in-group and the out-group in this type of representation. In this way, ethnic jokes play a crucial role in maintaining social cohesion within a given community, while simultaneously policing the limits of cultural integration, assimilation, and otherness. Now, in order to introduce the core concept of diasporic humor, so something which I identify as a different type of humor here, allow me to introduce Tehran Ghazri. Ghazri is an Iranian-American comedian, actor, and writer, well known for his stand-up comedy, especially his work in television and film appearances. He often explores themes related to his Iranian heritage, the immigrant experience, and the complexities of cultural identity through humor. Ghazri's statement here can be understood in light of my idea of diasporic humor, which moves beyond Davis' concept of ethnic humor. While Davis' ethnic humor tends to focus on the tensions and stereotypes within a particular ethnic or national group, Tehran Ghazri and other diasporic stand-up comedians reflect a more fluid, hybrid approach to identity. The blending of cultural identities expressed as a mix of race, heritage, and religious belief signals a diasporic perspective that defies traditional boundaries and fixed cultural categories. Now, the idea of being on the outside looking in and at the same time on the inside looking out encapsulates the dual consciousness central to diasporic humor. The ability to navigate and experience multiple cultural worlds which somehow are both present. And it underscores the hybrid nature of diasporic identities, which often operates in the spaces where different cultural codes intersect. This dual consciousness embodies an incongruity between insider and outsider perspective, creating a fertile ground for humor by juxtaposing conflicting cultural script. I'm actually quoting Ruskin, but also Attardo 2001. And this way, diasporic humor, as I will argue, becomes both a subversive tool to negotiate cultural dissonance and a means to affirm hybrid identities, transforming tension into shared spaces of belongingness. I'm actually referring to Di Lotta here. Di Lotta maintains that this sort of insider-outsider or center-margins binary drives most ethnic humor throughout the 20th century. And even more important, it underlines the ways in which we often talk about race and identity. Then, of course, the discussion here goes on multiculturalism, but then, of course, it takes different types of dimension, which I'm not going to tackle, especially not today. Therefore, diasporic humor introduces a more complex and dynamic interplay of identity, one that operates at the intersection of self-disparagement and in-group aggregation, fostering what can be termed a double frontier. Now, this dual boundary functions on two levels. Internally, it reflects processes of cultural assimilation, negotiating the tensions between heritage and integration, and externally, since it engages in intergroup relations, where hybridity unsettles and reconfigures rigid ethnic and national identities. Diasporic comedians achieve this by weaving together linguistic, cultural, and ideological elements from multiple traditions, somehow subverting monolithic narratives and challenging dominant cultural discourses. These humorous narratives do not simply reinforce or reject traditional identity markers, rather they're somehow reimaging all of them, transforming fixed distinctions into fluid, permeable spaces of belonging. By playing with cross-cultural references, code switching, and irony, diasporic comedians, for instance, redraw these boundaries in lively and often subversive ways, demonstrating how humor can function as both a site of resistance and a medium for cultural negotiation in an increasingly, let's say, globalized world. Now, in light of this, my methodological framework draws from three key theoretical approaches to analyze diasporic humor in social media context. Well, of course, Ruskin's semantic script theory of humor explores how humor arises from conflicting cultural scripts, such as traditional versus modern or ethnic versus cosmopolitan. In diasporic humor, these oppositions reflect tensions between cultural worlds, highlighting the clash between tradition and modernity, or ethnic identity and global influences. And so the concept of hybrid script opposition further enriches this as multiple, often conflicting scripts merge, reflecting the fluid, evolving nature of diasporic identities. Humor emerges from the blending of these diverse cultural elements, creating new dynamic expression of identity. And here we go to Attardo's general theory of humor, building on Ruskin's theory, offers a more detailed structure for analyzing humor, incorporating 6 knowledge resources, which are those I'm actually interested in here. This expanded model is especially useful for understanding the complexities of diasporic humor, where multiple cultural references and knowledge layers interact among themselves. It provides a comprehensive approach to the analysis of how humor functions across various discourses, enriching the exploration of how humor reflects diasporic experience. And then we go to another important element, social media critical discourse studies, which is a useful framework that helps examine how humor adapts to the unique features of social media platforms. While discourses on this platform may remain consistent, their form and delivery shift in response to their characteristics of the medium, such as brevity, interactivity, and visual elements, something which will totally change somehow also the way stand-up is actually put on stage. Scholars like Kozravenek, Zia, and Unga have demonstrated how social media's inherent features shape and transform communicative practices by incorporating this perspective. Now, you can actually explore how diasporic humor is conveyed and received within these platforms, revealing how humor evolves in a digital context, especially in multicultural, transnational environments. And here are some references for the social media type of analysis that I usually bring to the fore. On social media communication, if you like using Goffman's, which goes back to 1959, again talking about age, terms, both identity cues that are given and those given off are mediated through language rather than face-to-face interaction. Now, in diasporic context, the whole thing becomes more complex here. This is crucial, as language helps negotiate multiple cultural identities. The very concept of context collapse, which we usually have on digital media, occurs when diverse social spheres converge on platforms like TikTok. I don't know whether I can use this word and refer to this platform talking to people living in the United States of America, because I heard that it's not that a friendly platform anymore, but still. Let me say that words and discourse remain essential in presenting and negotiating diasporic identity online. So despite the medium here, with humor after blending and reshaping cultural narratives, Boyd's idea of writing oneself into being underscores how humor, mainly in written form, plays a significant role in constructing these identities. Now, such a triangulation of methodologies applied to diasporic stand-up comedy may reveal how humor addresses cultural tensions and shifting identities, with comedians using hybrid script propositions to subvert cultural norms and techniques like code switching, irony, and self-referentiality to reshape cultural narratives and create new spaces for identity expression. Now, building on this backdrop, my only research question here for the study I'm actually presenting explores how diasporic stand-up comedians face their complexities of their performances, recognizing that their bodies and identities are often interpreted through the dominant cultural norms of the country in which they perform. So if they are in Britain, of course, that would be the norm. Which is so very important here in order to understand what type of humor we're dealing with, and how this awareness shapes their performing strategies and engagement with diverse audience. Now, the analysis of the specific type of script overlap in diasporic humor is essential in order to fully grasp its meaning and impact. In diasporic context, humor often operates within a framework that merges multiple cultural and linguistic references, drawing from diverse geographical but also social dimensions. Now, these overlapping scripts function not only to bridge these domains, but also to highlight the tensions, contradictions, and synergies that arise from the diasporic experience. The two major overlapping scripts operate within distinct semantic and conceptual realms, each corresponding to a hypernymic domain that contrasts yet intersects. The UK or the US versus India, for instance, or any other, let's say, location outside the country. These domains are not only geographically and culturally different, but also evoke distinct cultural, political, and social connotations. Now, the relationship between these two scripts is therefore, or anything which the script, of course, may refer to, may be somehow central to the meaning-making process, highlighting the tension or synergy between these divergent worlds. Now, in this context, the scripts are activated in two complementary ways, lexically and inferentially, because people are there standing in front of us. Now, lexically, the words and phrases used in the visual text evoke specific association tied to each domain. The choice of vocabulary, idiomatic expression, and syntactical structure can signal to the audience whether the narrative is rooted in the cultural framework of the UK or the US, if you like, or anywhere abroad. At the same time, inferential activation occurs when visual elements such as settings, the characters, or the actions prompt the viewer to draw conclusions based on prior knowledge, KRs, for instance, or contextual cues, which are visually there. These visual cues function as bridges, guiding the viewer's interpretation through cultural or geographical signifiers, whether explicit or subtle. So they're always there. They need to be, of course, taken into consideration in the analysis. In combination, both lexical and inferential activation work in tandem to establish a layered meaning within the visual text. The audience, depending on their own cultural background and interpretative framework, is invited to decode these scripts through a process that engages both direct linguistic references and deeper, more specific inferences related to the visual narrative. Thus, the interaction of these two scripts foster either a dynamic form of cross-cultural understanding or heightened dissonance, depending on the viewer's point of reference or knowledge resource. Now, in goodness gracious me, so going back to my first type of analysis, I have identified two-level mechanism in humor that they seem to work, even when we actually analyze stand-up on TikTok. A surface structure comprising universal scripts, non-culturally specific somehow, themes accessible to a broad audience, and a deep structure, which incorporates elements specific to diasporic subject, introducing scripts rooted in the source culture and language or languages. These deep structure scripts can only be inferred if the viewer, let's say the viewer does not, or if the viewer possesses the necessary cultural apparatus, the knowledge resources, to decode and appreciate them as humorous. Now, building on this, the diasporic comedian on TikTok deployed what Rappaport back in 2005 terms the sword and shield function of humor, enabling them to deflect prejudice while simultaneously critiquing from within. This dual function allows them to traverse complex sociocultural terrains, using humor as both a defense mechanism against discrimination and an incisive tool for challenging dominant narratives. This strategy aligns with a double frontier diasporic humor I was actually referring to before, which rather than merely delineating social and ethnic boundaries, as Davis suggests in his analysis of ethnic jokes, operates on two interrelated levels. Internally, where it actually reflects the processes of cultural assimilation, where diasporic subjects negotiate their heritage alongside pressures to conform to mainstream norms. Externally, it engages with broader intergroup relations, where hybridity disrupts and reconfigures rigid ethnic and national identity. But let's go back to TikTok. TikTok's format, combining brevity, visual storytelling, and interactive engagement, further amplifies this dynamic. The code switching, cultural references, and exaggerated self-representation, diasporic comedians, especially those on TikTok, as I was saying, would somehow manipulate linguistic and ideological scripts to highlight contradictions within both dominant and minority discourses. In doing so, they transform the fixed distinctions of ethnic humor into fixed but somehow fluid, permeable spaces of belonging, demonstrating how digital platforms serve as new arenas for the negotiation of identity through humor. However, could this be an inherent effect of diaspora? Diasporic humor, particularly on TikTok, risks losing its original cultural and critical depth over time. Humor that once served as a sharp commentary on identity and prejudice may become diluted, generalized, or misinterpreted as it spreads beyond its intended audience. The necessity of reaching diverse, often global viewers may contribute to the erosion of culturally specific references, ultimately transforming humor from a subversive tool of resistance into a more neutral form of entertainment. Digital platforms like TikTok accelerate some of this process through context collapse, where diverse audiences everywhere in the world, not necessarily in one specific place, diverse audiences with varying cultural backgrounds and languages interpret the same context differently, leading to the dilution of misinterpretation and of the original meaning. Let's now meet Nish Kumar, a British stand-up comedian, TV presenter, and podcaster born on 26 August 1985. Now, drawing on his diasporic background, he offers incisive commentary on, oh my God, there's an earthquake. My God, this was quite a strong one. Sorry. Oh, wow. Okay.
Is everything okay?
Everything is okay. Yes, nothing
Right.
further, but it was quite strong.
Wow.
So let's go back to Nish Kumar. Maybe Nish Kumar is a bit too much for that. Nish has emerged as a key figure in the representation of diasporic humor, using his platform to reflect on the experiences of multicultural communities and the shifting to reflect on the experiences of multicultural communities and the shifting meanings of cultural expression in today's interconnected world. Now, his current project in political podcasting further underscores his commitment to engaging audiences on questions of identity and cultural hybridity. It's easier to see him as a politician rather than a real TikToker. Now, these are just some topics he usually deals with. So you can see moves from climate collapse, income inequality, the emotional sensation of being British and Indian at the same time. Then we have Hari Kondabolu, an American stand-up comedian and writer of Indian descent, specifically from Telugu-speaking South Indian background. His comedy often reflects on his experiences as an Indian American addressing issues of race, immigration, and cultural representation. He can be regarded as another prominent example of diasporic humor, using comedy to examine race, inequity, and representations of Indian identity. His work challenges stereotypes and engages with the complexity of cultural heritage in a globalized world. Through his sharp social commentary, he highlights the tensions between mainstream perceptions and lived experiences, offering a perspective shaped by both critique and self-reflection. His approach underscores how diasporic humor can serve as both resistance and redefinition, reshaping conversations and identity in contemporary media. Now, let's start from the very beginning, though. So the very starting point here, especially because he was the real one influencing everybody in the States and, of course, in Canada, was born on September 29, 1970 in Toronto, Canada. Russell Peters is a pioneering comedian of Indian heritage who broke into the mainstream comedy scene in North America. Russell Dominic Peters is the first diasporic comedian in North America to achieve mainstream success, paving the way for a generation of Indian American stand-ups. His 24 performance on Comedy Now went viral on YouTube, launching his career and inspiring a generation of Indian American diasporic comedians. So that's why we're actually starting from him. Peters is known for his observational humor, which explores cultural identity, race, and stereotypes, often blending Western and Indian cultural references. His success has made him one of the highest paid comedians globally, further somehow solidifying his influence on comedy and its evolution on the digital space. Now, this is quite interesting. It's a quite old video, which then became viral on TikTok and, of course, on social media. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with this. I'll try to show this, How to Become a Canadian, which is a comedy special where Peter somehow blends his sharp wit with insightful observation about Canadian identity, immigration, and cultural diversity that defines the country. In his show, he humorously examines the complexities of becoming a Canadian citizen, from the bureaucratic process to the different steps of integrating into Canadian society. Now, through his storytelling, Peters draws on his own experience as a child of Indian immigrants. This is what happens anytime we have diasporic stand-up, of course, offering comedic commentary on cultural assimilation, stereotypes, and the challenges faced by newcomers. The performance highlights Peter's ability to engage with issues of race, nationality, and belonging, all while delivering his trademark humor that resonates with a wide range of audiences. Let me show you just this very short.
All right. You guys having a good time now? Nice. So this is we're getting an idea of the show now. You know what I'm saying? But I'll tell you something. My parents now have been in Canada 41 years. They moved from India to Canada 41 years ago. I don't know how they picked it or whatever, but they were like, Canada. And I was like, okay, well, maybe when you get there, you'll be able to say it. So, but when my dad first moved to Canada, he didn't just want to live here. You know what I mean? He didn't want to be a guy that just lived in Canada. He wanted to become a Canadian. And he thought that there was things that you could do to become a Canadian. Like you just do a couple of things and bang, overnight, you're a Canadian. You know what I mean? I used to come up with these schemes when I was a kid. I remember one time when I was a little kid, he called me. He was like, son, come here. Here's the thing with Indian parents too. They never just tell you directly to come and do something. It's just not that kind of culture. You know what I mean? Indian parents will not boss you around like that. Hey, come here, because they have salesmen built into them. You know what I mean? No matter what the situation is, they feel the need to convince you to do something. You know what I mean? And sometimes they'll just take one word and make it sound like a question to make you come there and be like, Russell, come. Come.
Okay, just to give you the idea, the type.
All right. You guys.
Now, I'm going to introduce now. Well, that's the first script that we're going to analyze to see the way it works. Of course, this is part of the speech that he was actually carrying on, in which he talks about his father that decides to organize a barbecue. But of course, he wants to make it the Canadian way. The thing is that he's going to cook rice and, of course, Indian food. Well, in this case, the script opposition is quite interesting here. This is a semantic schematic representation which refers to a structured way of organizing knowledge that combines meaning, that is to say semantics, and structure, that is to say schematics, to represent concepts, their relationship, and how they interact. So here we have, of course, the description of what is Indian in the script, what is Canadian, and then, of course, the way the speech is actually organized, and of course the humorous final punchline when he says, of course, well, the rice keeps falling through the grill, because he's actually trying to cook something on a grill which is not meat. What we have here is quite interesting, because we can break down the dialogue into two main sets, Canada and India, with a connecting element of being barbecue or a cooking method. The intersection of the two sets highlights the humorous clash between traditional Indian food practices and Canadian barbecue culture. So it's the encounter of the two which actually becomes here fundamental for us. Now, let me try to introduce another type of sketch that is actually very popular, connected to him, and many others stand up from him onward. In this case, we also should have a video. I'm not sure whether it works though.
Sitting there on the phone, he had the newspaper open in front of him. He had an ad circled. Somebody was selling a couch, right? So my dad's on the phone. He calls the ad, and on the other end of the phone, some Eastern European lady answered, and she couldn't speak any English. And all I hear is, "Hello, I'm calling about your couch." Hello. Hello. I want to know about your couch. Hello. Okay. I said hello twice. I would like to purchase your couch. And no English. I'm sorry. And no English. Then why the hell did you answer the phone? You don't come to my country if you can't speak the language.
Now, of course, the schematic representation is also very clear. It's quite simple to organize into the two different types of space, the immigrant and non-immigrant one. And then we have this major video, which was quite interesting, Beating Your Kids, because he built up all of his career on the fact that, of course, his Asian parents were actually used to beat the kids. Let me see whether this works.
That's one thing that separates immigrant families from the regular Canadian families, you know? Doesn't matter where your parents are from. They weren't born in this country. They will whoop your ass when you're growing up. Okay? It doesn't matter where your parents from. Ukraine, you know what I'm saying? They'll beat you with a cabbage roll. You know what I'm saying? They'll smack a pierogi upside your head if you have to. They'll beat you, right? Immigrant parents will beat their kids. Canadian parents are a little too soft on their kids. And that's fine, whatever makes you happy. But you need to start beating the kids.
Okay, and so on and so forth. We actually see this command representation again between immigrant and non-immigrant. Now, in this case, in a set theory type of representation where you see the non-immigrant with non-corporeal punishment and the immigrant with corporeal punishment, the hybrid script was somehow integrated by something which would express social exclusion. Again, we got so many other example. Let me go to one which possibly is very nice, the idea of a combined gay marriage. So just trying to keep the two traditions alive, the American, the Canadian one, and of course the Indian one. There are bigger things to worry about than same-sex marriage. I got to worry about arranged marriage. They're out of control when they are same-sex arranged marriages. So the idea of a combined marriage and of course a gay marriage would somehow play with the expected and unexpected type of position in this type of humor. Let me try and reach my conclusion here. The 5 points cover essential aspects of that somehow make diasporic comedy unique. Power dynamics and subverted balance. Now, this condition highlights how diasporic humor doesn't just reflect cultural differences, but also critiques the shifting power structures between the homeland and the host country. By subverting these structures, the comedian creates space for new, often comic interpretations of authority and cultural dominance. And of course, in doing so, humor acts as a discursive open space where comedians can question social hierarchies and create alternative narratives of belonging and resistance. This would lead to, of course, releasing anxiety, construction of the other. Humor is, well, the humor in the context, in this case, functions as a tool for dismantling stereotypes and cultural anxieties. The construction of the other is not merely an external concept, but also a means of interpreting one's own identity through a comedic reversal. The other becomes the interpretative framework to understand the in-group and vice versa. The humor in this case, works to relieve tension surrounding cultural differences, while allowing the comedian to reframe or deconstruct those very differences. This comedic reframing deconstruction therefore seems to challenge binary opposition, us versus them, insider versus outsider, entailing a more fluid sense of identity that embraces multiplicity and ambiguity, bringing to hybrid scripts. So the use of hybrid scripts is perhaps the most distinctive feature of diasporic humor. By combining elements from both the native culture and the adopted culture, comedians create a rich and layered narrative that reflects the complexity of living between two or more worlds. This blending often exposes the contradictions and tensions inherent in facing these cultural intersections, adding depth to the humor, which of course is going to be somehow represented or performed on stage. In this way, these hybrid scripts not only reflect the experience of cultural negotiation, but also offer a playful commentary on how cultural practices can be simultaneously adopted, but if you like, also reimagined somewhere else. A key element that is represented by cross-cultural mapping and incongruity resolution. The incongruity resolution here works powerfully as the comedic tension emerges from mismatched cultural references. Now, the audience, equipped with cultural knowledge, resolves these incongruities, creating a shared moment of understanding that bridges the gap between the two cultures. This process is essential in both subverting and reaffirming cultural norms. Now, in this context and under the right circumstances, diasporic humor may become a performative act of cultural translation, thus requiring audiences to decode multiple layers of meaning based on their varying cultural, let's say, competences. And finally, diasporic humor introduces a hybrid post-national identity, challenging the national concept of national belonging. Somehow it weakens the notion of a singular mainstream while simultaneously amplifying the value of multicultural identities, making space for a more complex and inclusive understanding of global citizenship. Now, this hybrid, well, the resulting, if you like, hybrid identity reflects a liminal space created through humor, where cultural borders blur, allowing for new forms of affiliation that transcend national boundaries while celebrating a multiplicity. Now, together, these conditions encapsulate the unique, often revolutionary nature of diasporic humor, showing how it can subvert, challenge, and ultimately redefine cultural boundaries, identities, and power structure. And I think I'm done.
So I really like this idea of hybrid script, that blends the native and the adoptive, cultural references. So would you say that that's a built-in script opposition there?
Yes, that's what actually we're thinking of. It's a built-in script opposition because the way this dual shift works is actually has to be seen in one single block. Otherwise, the whole idea of diasporic falls somehow outside. So instead of seeing it as a two separate thing, it's one single block, basically, which builds on somehow a sort of identity representation within that type of script.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting idea. Okay, would you like me to read the questions from the
Yes,
chat?
please, because it's so very small for me and I can't read it.
Okay, so the first question from Amy Friedman, she says, I'm noting that you're including a lot of male performers, but much of this work might not have been possible without the work of British Indian writer and performer Mira Sial, who co-wrote and starred in Goodness Gracious Me, and acted in the Kumars at 42, and wrote a number of other things. So she probably
I just didn't have time, but the mother of all this is actually Mira Sial. She was actually the genius behind Goodness Gracious Me. Everything comes from there. Everything comes from India, and everything comes from there, basically. So it was the main philosophy. It's not just Mira Sial, but we also have a lot of female performance in the United States, for instance, stand-up comedian in the United States. They're very popular just because they try to somehow rewrite that sort of diasporic humor, although their origin, of course, are quite different. They're not all just from India. They come from the Arabic country, for instance, everywhere else. But the formula they perform is the one coming from Mira Sial. She was the real initiator. I mean, there are so many women stand-up performers that, of course, are going to be quoted when analyzing all of them all together, especially from China, from Korea, from many other countries.
So following up on that, Amy says another significant woman writer, Liselle Kaila, who wrote the first all-Black BBC sitcom focused on a British Jamaican family. So then there is a question which I think will get a lot of traction. Anita Zanstra says, I very much enjoyed this. Can you share information on how to get your book?
Yeah, I can send it to you. Just send me an email. It's an old book, so of course, just send me an email. I will send you the book in the digital format. There's a new one coming out, which is actually based on this presentation, and it's going to work on especially platforms, digital platforms, and just in order to see the way also the platform here becomes fundamental in order to create and recreate that space of identity building, basically. Because apart from looking at the whole process from a linguistic viewpoint, which is what happens in my old publication. Now, what I'm trying to look at is the way social media, SNSs, basically social networking system, also allow, by means of different types of affordances, the possibility of creating a different type and representing a different type of stand-up, where the interaction with the audience, although of course not at the same time because it's not simultaneous, becomes fundamental in order to create more and more space for sharing, basically. So yes, no problem. Just send me an email and I will send you the old publication.
And when can we expect the new book?
My contract expires April 2025, but of course I won't be ready before it won't be ready before June or July, hopefully.
So probably in 2025,
not 2026.
Right, but publication will take a little bit.
Yeah, but of course they're quite slow. Yes, of course it takes time. I mean, I will hand it in by July.
Okay. Yeah, so Anita, you will want to email Dr. Balirano.
Yes.
Or you can email me and I'll forward the
I'll
email.
write you my email here.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Or shall we just thank he has a question. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you, Giuseppe. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Anthony.
I just wanted to ask, I mean, very interesting. It made me thinking because, you know, my work on Italian diaspora culture and humor, and I found it interesting. And I go, you know, and I'm thinking, it made me think of a lot of things. And I go, a lot of the studies, I just wrote some stuff that we see of these cultural products is they emerge from the periphery. What happens though when the periphery speaks back to the center? That's the stuff that I'm more interested in. And you talk about social media because there's a lot of contention between who's what. And, you know, as we move into hybridity, but when hybridity in the third space, Homi Baba again. And particularly, I'm thinking, you mentioned Russell Peters, and speaking of platforms, there's the Indian detective, which I felt was a very novel idea of the periphery speaking back to the center. Now, the Mo television show on Netflix as well, season 1 and 2. There's a lot of issues being undocumented Palestinian, so it's very relative. And that is also Rafi is another show. And these are Pulitzer Prize winning shows that specifically deal with Italian, diasporic culture. And the last one I was thinking is also Masters of None.
Yeah.
That takes place in Italy. So again, we have these different diasporas who are disparate, because when we look at the Italian diaspora, we're talking about a historic one, because the new diaspora now with social media, can we even say we have diaspora when you're always connected to your center now? There's no more breaking off anymore. So I just wanted to ask you, you know, again, how these contemporary trends and what you're thinking about that. And I think you're probably, what you said, moving into that with your new book, if you prefer. You'd like to.
Absolutely. Actually, thank you, because you gave me a lot of important books I'm going to develop from there. And what is quite interesting, especially when you deal with Italian, Italian diaspora. I mean, the very term diaspora doesn't make sense, especially when you refer to the United States of America. And the fact that, of course, we are heating from the type of humor that actually heats from the original culture and gets to the center. So from the periphery to the center, it's quite difficult to understand, especially for Italians, because where is the center? I mean, what is the periphery? What is the center, especially for an Italo-American one? What is also very interesting there is that I found out, and that's quite interesting, that what counts more than anything else, especially for Italian stand-up comedian living abroad, of course, so in any form of diaspora, is the possible intersection with any other possible identity they represent. Academic world, for instance, being gay, so being part of the LGBTI community, for instance, and there being Italian at the same time as a sort of a clash, and so many other layers which possibly I've only seen somehow developed by Italo-American stand-up comedian, which is quite interesting, because then it shows you that the geographical origin and their, let's say, culture or background culture is not as important as the intersectional part of their identity, which comes to the fore. So yes, absolutely, that's quite interesting, something to actually look into with a lot of interest, and new somehow interest also in the way this new and novel script. Maybe we don't talk about two script opposition there. There's actually a sort of opposition of 2 or 3, even 4 scripts, which somehow one on the other, or as Salvatore was saying, thinking of it as a unique block where identity is actually molded together by means of different type of references you may have from there, depart. So it's very complicated, and it's very interesting from both a humorous viewpoint and from a linguistic viewpoint to analyze.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, again, please join me in thanking our presenter for this lovely presentation. And we're going to take a 5-minute